So in this audio, I want to talk about the most important question to ask, the most important subject to focus on, the most important place to put our energy and our attention and our intention. And there's a really important thing to discuss on the subject of attention and leverage, because in the current reality that we live in, there are just infinite things that we can put our attention on, infinite things that we can put our energy on. But time itself is a limited resource. Energy itself is a limited resource in the physical sense. So if we only have a finite amount of time and energy, and if we really want to achieve, our goals and really have the most out of this life, we need to put our attention and our energy in the highest leverage, the highest reward, and the highest return for our investment that we can. And ultimately, this boils down to the question of who am I and what do I want? Now, maybe you've heard this from other spiritual teachers or philosophical texts, and on the surface, it seems a bit trite, and it seems like, oh yeah, that's whatever, that's not really a big deal. And you may think, who am I, what do I want, is, something as simple and mundane as, oh, well, do I want the red shirt or the blue shirt, or do I want a BMW or do I want a Mercedes? This is something much, much deeper. This is a question that ultimately you're not going to get answers to right off the bat. You're not going to say, who am I, what do I want? And 2 seconds later, you're going to say, okay, well, I want this house and this car, and I want to have this life and this partner and do this with my time, and I'm going to wake up at this time, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go to bed at this time and do this. It's not going to pan out like that in most cases. Now, sure, you may have a vision or a flash of insight, but in most cases, it's a process of learning and a process of figuring out, what you like, what you don't like, who you want to be around, who you don't want to be around, and that's okay, because not all questions are supposed to have answers. Sometimes the question itself is the answer, and sometimes the answer itself is not really something that can be put into words, and it's not something that can be put into a literal, like a sentence, like a subject, noun context. It's something that's much bigger than that. It just has to be perceived and observed and absorbed on a much deeper gut level. It's something that's more of a, more in tune with our gut and our heart, less than our intellect. So our intellect is very limited, and our intellect is conditioned by our past experiences, by what we were exposed to as we're growing up, what, people told us we should and shouldn't be. Whereas we have other brains that are, less conditioned, if not free of the conditioning that our intellect is. So that would be like our gut or our heart, or even, higher faculties than that. If you want to take it a step further, some people will say, higher self, intuition, things like that. So we have these other aspects to our being that are at our disposal that can guide us and can give us answers. So this question is not really something that's, going to have an answer right off the bat, but it's something that will guide our perception, guide our experience. And since we can, experience an infinite amount of things, if we don't set some parameters, if we don't set some guidelines or some foundations or some sort of something to aim for, then we're just going to be wandering aimlessly. And there's a saying that says you can't hit a target that you can't see. So if you're not even looking for something, then obviously you're never going to find it. Now you're never going to come to a point to where you're going to say, oh, I know who I am and I know what I want, now I'm done. Because that's not how it works. It's always an ever-changing and flowing thing, because that's ultimately how the universe functions. It's always in flux, it's always in change. And really, all our job is to find out who we are, discover what we want, and then be that and do that. Pretty much everything else is just details and or a distraction. Obviously, there's some social things like, paying your taxes or speed limits and things like that. You might say, oh, well, I don't want to pay my taxes, or I don't want to, abide by cultural, mores. Now, that's a little bit more surface, and that's kind of not a part of this conversation. ultimately, by figuring out who you are and what you want, this is truly what it means to create your reality. Now, some people might think, well, we can create who we are and what we want, and it's up to our free will. Ultimately, this free will is just conditioned by everything that we've experienced. And it's really, this free will and self is just something that's been made up so that we're easily, so that we can easily be bought and sold. So people think free will and choice and, creating themselves is, do I want Burger King or KFC or McDonald's? That's really not what we're talking about. Because if you study pretty much all the old spiritual traditions and all of the effective traditions, they all basically laugh at this concept of self and this concept of free will. And basically, they all have a concept that's, you can call dharma or mission or like your purpose. And ultimately, what it means to find out who you are and what you want is to discover this and unfold this. And it's probably not going to be something you can accurately put in words, but it's something that you know and will feel, and it's something that you can express in this reality. And that's really all that it boils down to, is to express who and what you are, because that's your purpose, that's your mission, that's why you're here, that's your purpose on this plane. And that's really the only way to true happiness and health. And if you look at it in a very practical way, if you go out and you're going shopping or you're out and about in society and you see people that are just miserable or hate what they're doing, they're obviously they don't know who they are or what they want. So they're not getting it. They're not working for it. They're not trying to create it. And they're miserable because of it. But then on the contrast, you see people who've asked these questions and who are doing what they want and are obviously much happier, and they treat people better and they're much healthier. And this isn't necessarily something that they try to do or work to do. It's just an unfoldment of who they are, because they're coming from a truer place. They're coming from their core. They're coming from the source of who they really are. And ultimately, these virtues that are espoused by most traditions and that we all seem to strive for can only come when we connect with who we are and what we really want. Now, so some things to take action on is to just start asking yourself every day, who am I? What do I want? What's my purpose? How can I be more of who I really am? And just allow this to unfold, and don't expect that you're going to get a crystal clear answer. Expect that your life is going to be changing and flowing and growing, and you're going to be experiencing new things. But without these questions, without this, these guidelines, you're never really going to get anywhere near true health and happiness. So one stumbling block that could come up is that, oh, well, I don't know and I'll never know. That's one thing that can come up. The next thing is ultimately that, oh, well, so-and-so will not like me because of it, or, I really know that I should be, a musician, or that I should be a doctor, but my parents told me that I should be a lawyer, and I have to do that because that's how my family does it, that's what it's always been, and that's just what I have to do. And ultimately, that's just going to lead to more suffering and hardship and unhappiness in the long term. Now, you're going to feel a lot of that in the short term, and there may be some, you may be able to avoid the awkward conversation with the family member, whoever, for a little bit, but ultimately it's just going to build resentment and hatred and just negativity around the whole situation and the dynamic of the interaction. So those are just some things to be wary of, is, oh, well, so-and-so will think this, or they'll think that, or I can't do that, or, and don't beat yourself up for thinking that. It's totally natural, and everyone experiences those emotions, but the point is to realize that you really don't have a choice. Ultimately, your purpose is to be yourself, and it's really just like, we're in a stream, and we can either, fight against it or flow with it. In either way, we're still being pushed by it. We're still flowing with it. One is just kind of harder than the other, and one is just easier than the other. So ultimately, that's our only choice, is to just go along with the stream or to fight it. And ultimately, that boils down to the question of, who am I and what do I want? one way leads to, fighting the stream, and the other leads to flowing with it. Because ultimately, the universe wants us to express who we are, just like trees grow in, blow in the wind and blossom in the spring, because that's what they do. Birds fly and sing because that's who they are. We have our own purpose and our mission and a dharma that we need to fulfill. Other